Welcome to, I think it's live. Welcome to ImPossible Conversation. I'm your host, Suki, and my goal is to introduce you to the ordinary people that are doing extraordinary things, inspiring you and me and others to follow our dreams. Dalai Lama said, just as ripples spread out when a single pebble dropped in the water, the actions of individuals can have far-reaching effects. ImPossible Conversation is all about you and your story. Your story is unique and so different and not worthy of a comparison. Tonight, my guest is Dave Algeo, speaker, writer, podcaster, and well-being coach. He has a passion and interest in male mental health. So I'm going to welcome Dave now. Hello? Can you hear me? I can't hear you. I don't know what's wrong here. Because it was just fine before, wasn't it?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Right.
So
Good to
I've
speak.
just introduced you.
Cool.
Writer, podcaster, speaker, mental health coach.
Yeah.
Specialized by men's health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose it's the podcasting, writing, and all of that kind of thing is the means for me of reaching the people that I'm interested in helping. I mean, I want to help everybody if I can, but you've got to be realistic. You can't reach everybody, can you? So, but I'm particularly interested and passionate about engaging with blokes like me, blokes who probably like me have struggled in the past to break out of the kind of expectations that the role of being a bloke or a man can put on you. And for me, it's about how do you break that? How do you break through that so that you can actually find out who you are, not who society or culture or whatever kind of dictates who you should be. And for me, so the podcasting, the writing, the speaking, and all that kind of thing is all about how to get those messages across.
Okay. Can I just quickly check, because I've just got a message from Les saying it's quite echo. There was an echo, and just wondering if it's still echoing or not.
Is it echoing on my side?
Yeah. Hello, Gaia. Hey, Mala. Is it echoing over there, like at Facebook? Because we are streaming through a different program. Like, I have no reply, so probably okay-ish. Okay, yeah, the male mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess it kind of ties into my own personal story, which kind of dates back a long time. I suppose when I was a kid growing up, I've always felt a bit out of step with the world, I guess, with found it hard to understand the world, and probably the world found it hard to understand me, as somebody who was kind of more introvert and quiet and pretty shy and socially awkward. I kind of grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me, and a lot of my way of coping and dealing with that was to work hard to fit into whatever, friends, upbringing, school friends, all that kind of thing, was to kind of get you to fit into a certain way. And that worked. It worked to help me feel part of something, I guess, through school, through college, and then onto my job as a police officer for a lot of years. And I think there's a point where, actually conforming and trying to be somebody you're not, it can be useful protection, but there's a point where, I guess, in life where you realize, hang on a minute, life's too short for this, and surely there's more to life, and surely I'm not as, the real me that's behind this facade isn't as bad as I think, isn't as bad as useless or bad or as useless or inept as I think, So the journey for me started, must be 15 or so years ago now, when I started to really think, is this it? There's got to be more to this. I'm going to spend the rest of my working professional career as a police officer. but also as a husband and as a family man and just a bloke, being not me. And actually, who am I? Who is this person called Dave Algeo? And back then, I think 15 years ago, there was self-development. There's still, there was a fair bit, but not to the extent that there is now. And it certainly wasn't something that, as a northeastern bloke, you could access easily or talk about easily with anybody, really. So I kind of struggled with that, but started that journey, reading books. There wasn't podcasts back then, that kind of thing. There wasn't
Yeah.
this kind of thing. And you kind of bimble through, or I did bimble through my own journey of self-discovery, I guess, making lots of mistakes and taking, I would say, good 10 or so years to really start to find my feet with it. And in amongst that, that's when I started to realize at the heart of it, what I love to do is to write and communicate and teach. And I guess the conversations that interest me more, so the genuine conversations with people, men or women, who are potentially in the same predicament as me, or as I was then, as somebody who is thinking, come on, there's got to be more to life than this. How can I break through and be me and find out who me is? So that's kind of the journey that I've been on in the last 10 or so years, well, 15 years now.
Yeah. And if you think, was there like anything triggered you to think that way? Like 10, 15 years ago, what was that trigger moment?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one of them was I've got 3 children now, but my son Thomas, when he was about 4-year-old, he kind of stomped into the kitchen to his mum and said, God, Dad's in a bad mood again, isn't he? And it was that was one of those points where you think, yeah, I am in a bad mood. And do you know what? That little lad's never seen me in a good mood. He's 4-year-old and he's not seen me in a good mood his entire life. And it was one of those points where you start to think, you know what? I'm taking it all too seriously. There's something, I'm trying to be this and that and drive myself to some other standard. And actually, I'm losing the joy, and I'd forgotten how to smile or laugh. And it was one of those points that you think, yeah, I am taking it too seriously. And surely there's more to life than this. Surely life isn't all about the grind, if you like, and the trying to get somewhere. Now, I'm very much, as a coach and a speaker and trainer, I very much believe in setting goals and having some sort of vision for where you want to head towards. But I also think, what about now? What about the here and now? And not sacrificing the here and now and enjoying the moment and the precious times of my son, who was 4-year-old, growing up right in front of my eyes, and not missing that. And it was one of those moments where you think, come on, Dave, we need to do something about this. And it wasn't an overnight fix. There was no quick turnaround. It was a bit like turning a tanker in the ocean. It took a good while, and a bit of trial and error, finding the right support, coaches, reading, sources of material that helped me move in the right direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because your technique to help others, it's not just a normal one, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I guess what I'm very, before I go into the things that I use, which I know what you're talking about, what I recognize is that I think most of us as human beings think in metaphors, and we kind of tell ourselves stories. We tell ourselves stories about ourselves, about other people and each other and the world. And those stories are kind of what dictate how we navigate life. And in the stories, we kind of have metaphors and comparisons. So it's like this, life is like a box of chocolates, as Forrest Gump would say. We're always creating these metaphors. And I remember when I was starting my journey, kind of looking and researching and reading, particularly around stress, because for me, stress is about, it's the thing that gets in the way of who I want to be, how I want to feel, and where I want to go. When I was reading and researching about stress and the physiology of stress, the fight or flight and that kind of thing, an analogy struck me, or a memory struck me rather,
Mhm.
of a children's program from a good few years ago, Crackerjack. And for those who may be listening or watching who remember Crackerjack, this was a kids program on the telly quite a long time ago. But on there was a game called Cabbages and Kings. And I'm not going to go into explain it fully, but basically the
Mhm.
children would compete. They would answer questions and they would get prizes. And if they got a question wrong, they'd get a cabbage. If you got 3 cabbages, you were out. So that kind
Mhm.
of builds a picture. And as I imagined that whilst I was reading this material on stress, I kind of thought, yeah, that's quite a good image of how we get bogged down in life. So you have the prizes, and in my case, I use cuddly toys as to represent the good stuff. So the prizes are the good things in life, the things that you want in life, and the cabbages are the booby prize, or the demands and the challenges, the good thing.
Mhm.
The good challenges that you take on in order to have the good stuff, but also the demands that aren't so good, the smelly cabbages, I call them. And you're carrying around a bunch of good stuff, but on top, life puts cabbages. This demand, workload, financial worries, relationship issues, all sorts of things. Caring for an elderly relative, you love them, but it's
Mhm.
still very demanding when somebody's struggling with dementia and what have you. So these challenges are mounting, and we can lose sight of the good stuff in life because we're too busy dealing with the challenges and the demands, the negative demands and the cabbages, those,
Mhm.
as that game represents. So for me, that's the metaphor that I use. um, I use it in my workshops and my speaking, but I also use it in my coaching, because it's about
Mhm.
what are the challenges that you're facing and how can you kind of identify them and separate out your cabbages. So when we're feeling really, really stressed, we often don't see individual problems or challenges. We just see a big pile of them coming down on us, and the challenge
Mhm.
really is for us to step back and identify the individual challenges. I've got this financial issue, work is being really hard, I'm experiencing this bullying issue at work, financial, there's lots of different challenges, but we need to separate them out and deal with
Mhm.
the one that needs our attention the most, right now. And that's quite hard. Well, it's really hard when you're under stress and overwhelm. So I kind of use that as a metaphor to then build in tools to manage overwhelm, to help
Mhm.
slice the cabbage down, chunk that
Yeah.
cabbage into sprout-sized actions.
Mhm.
Where I come into the phrase, are you sweating the right sprouts? Because actually, as human beings, we love to sweat sprouts, and the sprouts represent things to do, actions, conversations, the moment by moment experiences. The thing is, we would rather often, when we're facing challenges, sweat the wrong sprouts, which is I'd rather go on Facebook or scroll through my emails than face and deal with the stuff that will help solve the challenge or the problem or move me forward. So it's about asking ourselves at any given time, am I sweating the right sprouts? So that's kind of the metaphors that I use for that. Might sound a
Yeah.
bit silly, but it's kind of the metaphors that seem to work when people kind of get them, to work with.
And it's very different, and you can really see.
Yeah,
And yeah, I
yeah,
really loved that. And could you explain me about what do you classify as a stress?
yeah.
What is
Right.
what is actually stress?
Yeah. This is one of the things about the word stress. It's it's got a lot of baggage. So I tend to stick with the fact that we have a stress response. So the stress response is what happens to us, our psychological, emotional, and physical response when we perceive a demand or a pressure. So it could be something outside. I'm walking along and I see something. Um, don't dwell on the image, but if I'm caveman Dave a few 100,000 years ago, if I saw a threat like a saber-toothed tiger,
Mhm.
then my instincts and everything will be saying, this is a threat, and it will activate my stress response. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
my blood starts to rush around and go to the parts that need it, like my legs and my arms, hopefully. My visual focus will get very acute and focused on the threat. So that's the stress response doing its job. But it's more than that, because your stress response is what helps you survive, but it's also what motivates you and gears you up to meet challenge. So not everything that is demanding is life threatening, but that stress response has come to I've got a deadline, I've got this to do, I've got that to do. It's what motivates that physiology and that emotional response to get you to do the thing that needs to be done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So your rather than thinking of stress, the stress response in effect is your survival mechanism, your fight or flight or freeze if it's extreme, and your motivation mechanism. It's what gears you up. It's what gets you out of bed on a morning, basically.
Because it's exactly the same chemical, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the same combination of chemicals. There are different hormonal signatures in there depending on it, but yeah, on the whole, it's the same combination of chemicals and release, etc. And that stress response in the moment can be very acute, depending on how strongly we feel that stress, that pressure that's facing us is. So if I'm facing something that I think, oh my God, this is terrible, my stress response is going to be, whoa, right up here. But if it's kind of, oh, I've dealt with that before, it might just go here and it gears me up. Now, that might be right. It might be right. It might not be the appropriate stress response. Up here may not be the appropriate stress response because somebody's just asked me, could you just go and wash the dishes? And so, whoa, you can't ask me that.
Why me?
Yeah, because our stress response is not about the reality of the threat or the stressor. It's about how I perceive it. Do I think that is something that's genuinely challenging, threatening, and demanding of me? So you're right. Yeah. So it depends on the level of that response. But one of the biggest challenges we have in this day and age, I think, is not so well. Yes, the acute stress response is an issue because that can send us into overwhelm. But underlying it, we live in a world that's always on. So what we have is this chronic level of the stress response activating. So we're always connected. Emails and notifications are always dropping into our phone or into our inbox, into our desktop. We always feel like the world wants something of us, and we're adding stuff in here. Like I've got to be, I should be, I need to be, I've got to be there, and I've got to do this, and you should be, and things should be. We're adding lots of stress. So what that means is that our stress response is activated all of the time almost. So it might not be in the peak state, overwhelm, but it's in that chronic level here. And when we're experiencing chronic stress for any length of time, that's when we really can experience the medium to long term effects of chronic stress can become negative, in terms of our mood, mental health, physical health and well-being, and emotional well-being as well.
So what can we do about it?
Right. Well, there's a lot of things.
Your method.
I'll keep my camera here. Sorry. Well, again, this is kind of where I like to talk principles using the metaphors of the cabbages, and the sprouts and what have you. I think the big thing is, firstly, is to know and recognize what does you look like and feel like, sound like, behave like when in that period of overwhelm, but also chronic stress. So what happens to you when you're feeling overwhelmed? And that's a common thing to ask for us to have experienced. For me, I can feel my head starting to spin. I feel panic rising. I feel that voice in here getting louder and louder saying, Dave, you're useless. It'll not work out. Those kinds of things. So if I know that, then I am in a better position to catch myself when it happens. That makes sense. So the first thing is to know what stress, overwhelm and overload, chronic stress is, then to recognize you when you are experiencing it, because we're all different. I mean, what happens to you, Suki, when you feel overwhelmed? How would you describe it, if you don't mind me asking?
I don't think I go overwhelmed that easily because I just don't take things seriously, I guess.
Right, that's a good strategy for starters.
So maybe I would go, I'm probably just not good enough.
Right.
That would be the thing.
Okay, so that self-talk in here is starting to say, it's starting to get a bit louder. This is one of the first steps, is to sort of start to reflect on when I'm feeling, and this is where I kind of step away from the word stress, because I think there is a lot of baggage around it. But when you feel the strain, when you feel like things are on top, or you feel like you're struggling, there's lots of different words. Well, I can't cope, or I'm struggling to cope. Or God, it's so hard. Use that language instead of stress, because that's a more practical, down to earth way. Use the language that works for you. But when I feel like I'm struggling to cope, I start to get that voice that says, you're not good enough, or you know, if you can identify those signs, that's the first step. Then the next step is as and when it happens, is get better. And it takes practice, but get better at catching yourself when you're doing it to yourself. So I've learned over time that when that negative voice gets louder, that's me feeling the pressure. And the pressure tipping from positive to negative, if you like. So once you can start to catch yourself, you're then in a position of control and power, because you can do something. If you don't spot yourself, you've got less options, haven't you? So, yeah. So when you can spot yourself, you can then say, right, hang on a minute, okay. And really, the first things, if you're in that position, the first golden rules are step away. You know, if you can create some space in that moment, and sometimes it's not possible. I mean, as a police officer, I've been in positions where you can't leave a situation, or I work with NHS emergency staff and all sorts of different people. They have to stay there. So, but the first thing is, if you can step away, just create some space from the thing that's creating the stress, or pushing your buttons, or however you want to describe it. Step away, go put the kettle on, go for a walk, go to the toilet, whatever. Just create space, because that space helps your brain get that distance it needs to go, okay, right. And then I then talk about give yourself a rescue breath, because I just talk about, like, your breathing is a great tool for just bringing your emotional temperature down, if you like, the stress level down. So that that breathing technique can be used if you step away and go put the kettle on. You can breathe and just what have you. Or if you're in the moment and you can't leave, a few seconds of just controlled, constructive breathing can be really, really powerful. And I talk about the rescue breath. There's loads of different techniques, so I'm not claiming to have the answer here. What I would suggest is slow down your breathing and try to move your breathing from up here, your shoulders, because what we tend to do is carry our attention here. Yeah, that's instinctive, because it's almost like I've got to protect myself, that kind of thing, or I'm going to run. Whereas actually it's counterintuitive, but what we need to do is kind of drop our shoulders and then just breathe into our abdomen, the abdominal breathing. And I like to give things that are memorable. So I talk about the rescue breath being 2-2-4. Rescue breath 2-2-4. Breathe in for 2, hold your breath for 2, breathe out nice and slowly for 4. 2-2-4. In your own time. I do talk through it in a workshop and just demonstrate, but in your own time, breathe through 2-2-4. So you've stepped away, you've put the kettle on and thought, oh, and then you go, and you're counting through 2-2-4. And the idea of that 2-2-4 is two things. One is you're engaging breathing in a slower way. The other is you're distracting yourself, not just by your breathing process, but by the counting. And by distracting yourself from those few seconds, you're giving your brain microseconds or seconds to just go, distance, let's just think about this. Because your brain's an amazing thing. It's an amazing piece of kit. It really is. And we need to get the best out of it. And the way to get the best out of it is to give it a few seconds of space. In the highest stress moments, in the times I've experienced it in kind of police work, but also I've worked with doctors who are working in emergency ER rooms and things like that. They have stop moments in the emergency rooms where they'll say, right, okay, let's just stop for a second. Because they know the value of a second pause in the critical times. Because if you carry on and your stress levels are just winding up and up and up, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to do something that is critically wrong and possibly irreparable. So if they can do it in an NHS emergency room, then we can do it in our day-to-day lives. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That just stop. Step away if you can. If you can't step away, just go silent and do 2-2-4 in your head. You don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to say, give us a second. 224 here. You don't have
Mhm.
to advertise it. You just say,
Yeah.
right, in your head, 224. And that helps create that distance. Because all we're trying to do in that moment of peak overwhelm is just bring ourselves down. It's not solving the problem, because the problem
Mhm.
is still there to be solved. But in
Mhm.
overwhelm, we're not in the right place of mind to solve it. So we need to bring ourselves down to get to a better position where we can deal with the challenge, the cabbage, the thing that needs to be dealt with. Yeah.
Mhm.
So that overwhelm is how we do it. So step away, remove from heat. I like to talk about it. You know, if you might
Mhm.
take a boiling pan off the stove, it's only going to continue to boil if you keep it on the stove. Take it off,
Mhm.
rescue breath, and then
Yeah.
get some perspective, and then start to assess: is this thing that's in front of me a big or a little thing? And that's kind of thing, because many of us, would you agree? Kind of, when we're stressed, we tend to overreact
Mhm.
to things,
Yeah.
because it's often not the real cabbages or the real demands and problems in our life that cause us to tip over the edge. It's
Mhm.
the small thing. It's that
Yeah.
one thing when you had a day from hell, and then somebody just comes up and says, "Could you just do this one thing?" That's what tips you over the edge. And actually, that becomes the problem, not the stuff that you've had building up all day. So, what I like to talk about is a very simple question. It sounds silly, but is this thing that's created the stress caused me to feel overwhelmed, cabbage or sprout? And simple question, but the idea is this thing that's making me feel overwhelmed, is it a big thing or a little thing? Because
Mhm.
often it's a little thing. And if it's a little thing, let's just recognize it as a little thing and tell ourselves, don't sweat that sprout, because that little thing does not deserve your attention or your reaction. That reaction, the cabbages deserve your attention and the reaction. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess that's in terms of overwhelm. It's recognizing that often we get overwhelmed because we're already carrying around a load of demands in our life. We're carrying around, getting the kids to school and back from school, getting to work on time, and everything builds up. And it just takes one little thing to light the spark
Mhm.
and to tip you over.
Yeah. And sorry. Yeah. For you.
No.
Uh-huh. Yeah, because when you talked about the little sprouts and the cabbages, and it sounds like if we keep giving loads of attention for everything, we'll be ended up getting stressed.
Yeah.
And that brings us to this book,
Oh, yeah,
which
right.
is I've
Yeah,
learned very first from you,
right.
the 4-hour work week. And I remember yesterday we were talking about it. You said when we give just a few hours like more priority,
Yeah,
then we will be even more productive.
yeah,
That is just like made me think about the sprouts and the cabbages as well.
yeah,
Because if we've got like longer hours, we try to do everything
yeah,
and like small stuff that no much effect.
yeah,
So we
yeah.
really
Well, that
need to.
that
Mhm.
that book, I'm guessing, will probably be familiar to a few people who watch the 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss.
Mhm.
The title is belies the content, because really, I don't work a 4 hour work week, and Tim Ferriss doesn't work a 4 hour work week.
Mhm.
But the principles there are to recognize that when we're working, and it relates to a lot to, well, work and life, but how often are we just trying to do everything? We're trying to deal with every cabbage and sweat every sprout, every last little thing, spend
Mhm.
every moment doing everything because we need to get that list finished. We need to move forward and complete that project, and everything needs to be done. And actually, that becomes a habit. And when we're talking about stress, that's when we start to get really sunk by it, you know.
Mhm.
And for me, the 4 hour work, I read it years ago, but I read it every year as a reminder. But
Yeah.
what became a particular priority for me a few years ago was when my little daughter Rosie was born. I
Mhm.
You can tell I'm not a young lad.
Mhm.
When she was born, I realized that when she turns 21, I'll be 66, God willing, if I'm still here. And what will I be? What will my health be like? All of those things were going around my head, and I realized, you know what? I teach this stuff. I teach the cabbages, the sprouts, and I teach how to manage stress and develop your well-being and invest in self-care. And I do a bit of it. But I realized, you know what? I'm not playing a long enough game. I'm not thinking far enough ahead. I'm thinking about
Mhm.
next 3 to 5 years, but a lot of my thinking was about like, oh, if I just get this, I'll get there, and then it'll be fine. I realized, you know what? If I carry on doing and living in the hamster wheel, the drive, the constant pressure I was putting myself under, I'm not sure I'd be there at 66, but also not fit at 66
Mhm.
when Rosie turns 21. So what I kind of started to think was, hang on a minute, right? I believe in the philosophies of the 4-hour work week, like the underpinning stuff. I'm not saying the 4-hour work week, but I mean the philosophies of stop working for a deferred life plan. And what Tim Ferriss means by that is many of us are thinking, when I retire, when I pay that debt off, when I get there, life will be. What
Mhm.
about right now? And
Mm.
I'd fallen back into that myself.
Mhm.
So there's that. And also that not every activity you do or undertake has an equal value in terms of moving you towards your goal. And that's the difference between sweating the right sprouts, because there's loads of tasks to do. There's lots of things we can do in life. There's lots of cabbages we can go after, slicing, dicing, and chunking down, sweating sprouts. There's lots of things we can do. But there's
Mhm.
only probably a few of those things that actually that actually move you forward to your goal, that count. I call them the sprouts with the most clout.
Mhm.
The actions that will move you forward more than the trivial stuff. And as a recovering perfectionist, I want to do it all, and it has to be perfectly. And I don't know if anybody else relates to that, but I think this is the pattern we can fall into. And when Rosie came along, I decided, I had a chat with Leslie. Leslie's a solicitor, and she wanted to go back to work and look at it, develop and continue her profession career. And I thought, you know what, this is an opportunity. So I said, right, how about go back to work? You go back to work. I'm going to continue my business, but what I'm going to do is work a 3-day week for the next few years, whilst Rosie's young and not at nursery, a baby and not at nursery and what have you.
Mhm.
And I wanted to treat it as an experiment. I wanted to see if what I thought just there was actually true. That if I limited the time that I had for work,
Mhm.
that I would get more thoughtful and careful about how I spent that time. Because one of the things I learned when I was working in the police and running my business at the same time was that I didn't have lots of energy and lots of time to dedicate to building my business. So I learned that actually I had to prioritize what I did and make it count. And it was the same when Rosie came along and I had a 3-day week business. I thought, right, I've committed to this. I'm looking after Rosie Monday and Friday, and my mum will look after her one day. We'll have a friend, childminder for a couple of
Mhm.
days. Those 3 days need to count. They need to really count. So my challenge was, how do I make them count and not just maintain my business, but grow my business? And it was about really picking the cabbages that I needed to focus on. What are the
Mhm.
demands, the priorities that I need to make to deal with that will move me forward or protect me from damaging my business,
Mhm.
and just deal with those cabbages. Now that's easier said than done, but it is about thinking about it and making some tough decisions. And it's like if you're short of money, let's be right. If you're
Mhm.
short of money, you
Yeah.
get careful with money, don't you?
Mhm.
The same with time. If you're short of time, and yes, I'd self-imposed it, but you get careful with your time and you think, right, is this activity, doing social media posts, lots and lots and lots of them, going to really move me forward? And the answer for me was no. Stop doing them and focus on sales, um, customer relations, and developing excellence in my product. Those were
Mhm.
kind of priorities. And as such, it helped manage the stress of the overload. Because if I'd had 5-day week, and for many people in business, it's not a 5-day week, it's a 7-day week, isn't it? Let's be right, 7 days, 9 till midnight, whatever.
Yeah.
You work all the hours you can.
Mhm.
Don't get us wrong, I still fall into that, and there are
Mhm.
weeks when it is like that.
Yeah.
But when you're in that, you work on anything and everything. But this created that constraint where I said, right, no, I need to focus on this, this, and this. And everything that I felt I needed to do or came in does it fit? Does it work with this? Yes or no? And if it wasn't, it didn't get done. And that in itself is quite a hard thing to manage. It's a hard thing to learn when you're somebody like me who is a perfectionist, but it was really useful as a discipline. So it was kind of that, I guess that's where that book built, you know, I kind of was testing it out for myself, if you like.
So it worked.
Yeah, wait, don't get me wrong. It's messy.
Yeah.
You know, 3-day week sounds great, but you know,
Mhm.
there were days when it was all over the place, or weeks when it was all over the place. But on the whole, yeah, it's been good. It's been a learning experience as much as a great experience. I spent some great time with Rosie growing up. I really have had some quality time, but I've had to learn how to not work. If that makes sense. And
Yeah.
there's a question, because I wonder how many of us, because we're full on, life is full on, we forget how to truly stop and be present in the here and now. And I remember sitting in the early days with Rosie, you know, when she slept a lot, as babies do when they're first. They sleep during the day, but not so much during the night. But when, you know, when she's sleeping, I'm thinking, oh, she could be asleep for an hour. I might just go and check emails. I might just do this. And I had to stop. I said, no, that's, you know, and the discipline around that came saying, no, hang on a minute. Remember what you're doing this for. And that was hard, because it was the habits of busyness. And I think that's really where I think a lot of us struggle. We're looking for an answer on how do I manage overwhelm and stress. And I think there are useful tools and tactics. There's lots of things that can help. But ultimately, if you really want to make a difference, you've got to go inside here and go under the hood into your head and start looking at the thoughts and the stories you tell yourself, the habits that you have, and how do you make new habits that are more constructive.
Yeah.
You know, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's the hard work, isn't it? That is the hard work.
It's really, really hard work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Well, all I was going to say was it's the hard work, but it's the best work. It's brilliant. You know, I mean, I suppose I'm speaking for somebody who loves this stuff, but, and I still catch myself. My brain is very devious at trying to trick me back into some of the old habits. But I'm kind of in a place where I think, I see what's happening here, and I'm kind of better at catching myself now. But it becomes a bit of I enjoy it. And maybe I'm just one of those weirdos, but rather than seeing it as hard work, I see it as this is an opportunity now, because if I can nail this one, if I can really break this one, you know, move forward. So it's kind of how you frame it, I guess.
So how did you change your habits?
Well, there's no quick fix in my view. I mean, I know, you know, some people may have different views, but I remember, I can't remember who gave this analogy, but I've kind of used it. I play the guitar, and if I'm playing it and the strings are a bit worn and old, then I need to think about changing the strings. And if you think about the worn and old strings, they relate to our habits. You know, they've served their purpose, they've done their job, but they've just got dull, or no matter how much you tune them or clean, they're not going to work. You need to change the strings. So sometimes it's about identifying the habits that you think, right, I really do need to focus on that. And really, it's about picking one habit. Don't try and change it all overnight. It's a long game. Let's play the long game. You live. Life's an ultra marathon, not just a marathon. So let's not try and sprint it. Let's pick a string, change that string, and work with that. But just like, that guitar, I put fresh new strings on it. Just because I put fresh new strings on it doesn't mean that it doesn't need retuning every so often or regularly. My guitar, even sitting in the room next door, needs a tune every time I pick up and play it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or if I move from a warm room to a cold room, it needs a tune up. And I think that's the same with our habits. You know, we'll nail something. I mean, I've done it myself. Kind of nail, so I've got that cracked. That's probably the time to worry, when you think you've got something cracked. But when you've got a habit, you think, right, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. This is my all or nothing mindset kicking in again. Right, I've got this nailed. Everything changes around you. It's like the change of the environment for the guitar. You need to think, hang on a minute, I need to retune this, because I'm going to fall back into that habit. So it's kind of, it's ongoing work is what I'm saying. You've got to constantly be practicing, playing, looking out for when it's out of tune it back in. And sometimes you need to replace the string.
Yeah. So it's
And again, I'm
like,
using metaphors, but ultimately it's about awareness. Catch yourself when you're having the habit and then getting back to the things that helped you. And for me, it was challenging it and saying, right, hang on, Dave, you've done it again. I'm not critical of myself. I've learned to be compassionate with myself, but that's not helpful. Let's do what is helpful. And kind of the self-talk shifts.
Yeah. So it's just like being very, very self-aware and then know what you're doing. And actually,
Yeah.
I caught you.
Yeah. Caught yourself.
Yeah.
But the other thing is also not being so, I mean, I'm not like Mr. Ultra vigilant on it. I'm not constantly self-aware because that's exhausting. It's just recognizing days or weeks or months might go and I'll suddenly think, oh, Dave. I had it recently over Christmas, actually. Or Christmas is for me, it's a good time to just have a bit of downtime. And you think, yeah, it's been a good year. It's been good, but you've slipped a little bit in your driving yourself forward and your head's gone to it'll be better when again, Dave. Do you know what I mean? So during the year, I might not have spotted that because I'm in the thick of it. But when I just have that quiet time over Christmas, and it's a lesson for me that I need to continue building in the quiet time more regularly. But having that quiet time makes you think, yeah, you've fallen back into a little bit of an older habit here. Let's get back onto that. Let's focus on that going forward. So it is constant work. But for me, that's the juice. That's what's great about life. You catch yourself and you work on it. And I guess that's what I love when I work with people as well, with other people. Yeah. It's good stuff.
Yeah. What do you think about, because there are kind of a newish trends coming up because it's prioritizing things depending on energy level. Are you a morning person or evening person? What's your most productive time? And prioritize like high priority stuff in there, and it's quite newish thing. Have you ever done anything like that?
Yeah. I'm not sure it's that new. I think these things come in and out.
New for me.
Well, no, you're right. But I think coming out. I mean, in terms of body clock, our circadian rhythms, there's good science, and I always go back to the research. I can't, I'm a self-confessed nerd when it comes to this stuff, but I go back. There is good science that suggests some of us are more orientated to be, early risers, and some of us are more orientated to be late risers and perform better later in the day, etc. It's an individual thing. So, I think you're right. It's about in your journey of learning what works for you, catching yourself in those habits. When am I most productive? It's about when are those times? For me, first thing on a morning, this miracle morning, not knocking it. It's just not for me. I am not a morning person. And yes, somebody could argue, well, that's because you're telling yourself that. Yeah, fair dues. But I've tried it, and all I found was I got up for 5:30 for a good few months, actually. 5:30. I was very productive at 5:30 in the morning for an hour and a half. But I noticed over 2 months doing it that my mood had dropped right. It was not making me happy. So it's about look at what people suggest. What's the advice that people give? And I try to steer away from very specific things. I know I'll give you the rescue breath, but take things, experiment with it. If it works, great. Keep it in the toolkit. If it doesn't, don't beat yourself up as it's your fault, because it's not. It's just not for you. Put it over there and try something else and build up. So you're right. If you're a morning person, get cracking, do what works for you. If you're not a morning person, do something that doesn't need the best of you until you are at your best. And when you're at your best, that's when you do the stuff that really matters. Yeah. So for me, writing and creativity does not come first thing on a morning. I'll tell you that. Coffee comes first thing on a morning for me.
Yeah, because I kind of tried the morning thing as well. I got friends who just come up at 5:00 and does everything, but when I get up at 5:00 in the morning, it's just like that, one click and it's 7 already, and I don't feel like I'm doing much in that time.
Yeah.
But because after midnight, if I'm sitting down and working, I'm like night owl.
There you go.
I
Yeah,
feel like I'm really productive. Yeah,
yeah.
and that's
And
interesting.
you could retrain yourself. There
Mhm,
is suggestion that you can do that, but why? If it works for you, and it works for you, and you're happy,
mhm.
why? There's no point, is there? Just do what works for you, and if it's enjoyable, do what works for you. You know,
Yeah,
that's the way I
no,
look
no
at it.
need of being hard on yourself. There is no
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I think there's a big part of that is there's enough energy required of the things that will move you forward to your goal. Don't
Mhm.
waste it on being hard on yourself. It's time to be disciplined and say, "Come on, I need to get on." Fine, but
Mhm.
don't waste it on constantly beating yourself up because you're not up at 5:30 or you're not doing this or you're not doing that.
Mhm.
That works for somebody else. It's
Yeah.
about working out what works for you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Those are sprouts, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But the sprouts can mount up if you keep chucking them at yourself, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we've nearly gone like about 45 minutes.
Oh,
And when I asked your favorite quote, you said, "Your playing small doesn't serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do."
yeah. I love that quote. I first heard it when Nelson Mandela gave his inaugural speech,
Mhm,
but it's a Marianne Williamson quote, so he quoted that, and it just struck a chord with me because I think I don't know. I think how many of us do this? We grow up into this world where we try to fit in, and part of that fitting in is to dampen down or hide the stuff that you are really excited about or passionate about or interested in or good at. And
mhm,
I spent a lot of my time apologizing for being good at certain things. I'm not good at everything, by God, no, but I'm good at certain things. But it
mhm,
wasn't vogue to be interested in chemistry or biology or, it just, that was swatty,
mhm,
And I learned that you hide the stuff that you're good at and you fit in. And that quote just gets the heart of that. Because when you do that and you fit in, you are playing small. It's not about
mhm,
being some massive big player in the world like Elon Musk arguably or whoever.
mhm,
What it is about is being you and playing big in being you and
mhm,
not hiding the things that you're good at, whatever that is. Uh,
mhm,
and and I suppose that's a quote that I have. Yep, just down there, across there on my wall there, because it's something I need to remind myself of, and I think many of us do. Stop it. Stop playing small. Stop hiding. Stop holding back. Stop apologizing for not getting up at 5:30 in the morning. Even if it's just in your head, just
mhm.
be you and be all you can be, and just be out there and just do it and
And
stuff.
just enjoy yourself.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Mhm,
And that's where I think you'll make the most impact, even if
mhm,
that's with the people closest. In fact, that's probably what matters the most. The people who are closest around you. If you're the real you, God, that's what they want.
mhm.
So that's my view on that quote. That's why it kind of really does resonate with me. And I've often joked about getting a tattoo on my back of that one. I haven't quite got around to that one, but yeah,
One day
I'll tell you
on
one. I'll tell you
your
if I
on your what is it? The stag do? It's very long.
get it. Yeah. No, I'm not. There's not going to be a hangover style stag do on that. I'm not going to do. Oh,
It's quite, it's quite
yeah,
long quote. So
it is. I'm not
it's
sure.
going to be like,
I'll turn up drunk with this like the back of me across me back. Like. No, I won't be doing that on my stag do. In fact, I'm not having a stag do. Funny enough. I'm going to have a quiet couple of drinks with some family and friends. Yeah.
awesome.
You okay?
No, I'm really bad. When I start laughing and it just like don't stop, right? Okay.
Yeah.
It's been absolutely amazing to have you as my guest,
Well,
Dave.
lovely to yeah, it's been
Yeah.
it's been lovely to talk to you, and obviously I love our connections anyway over the time, whether it's PSA or wherever. It's good to catch up, and I hope I made some sense.
Yeah.
Talking sprouts and cabbage, I hope I have made some sense.
Yeah. I'm sure because you're going to speak on Thursday at the Evolve Network
Yeah,
as well, don't you? Hmm.
it's kind of along those lines
Hmm.
that I'm going to be talking about. You know, the idea of yeah, kind of how do you shape a life more towards where you want. You know, not the quick fix idea, but you deserve to push in the direction that you want rather than just being dictated to by life and fitting in and all of those things.
Excellent. So if anyone wants to see Dave, go be on Thursday at Hamilton.
Yeah. With me sprouts and me cabbages.
Yes, sprouts and cabbages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Right.
well, lovely talking
Thanks
to you.
very much, and thank you everyone who's joined us. And we'll see you next Sunday. Bye bye.
Okay,
Thank
bye.
you,
See
Dave.
you. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye.